You think you know the story of the Desert War, Rommel's Afrika Korps sweeping across North Africa, tank battles in the sand, the seesaw campaign between the British 8th Army and German forces. But what if I told you that the turning point of the entire North African campaign wasn't a dramatic tank battle or a brilliant strategic maneuver, but a siege that lasted 242 days? That the fate of the Middle East came down to whether a motley collection of Australian and New Zealand soldiers could hold a dusty port town against the most famous general in the German army. This is the story they don't want you to know. The story of the siege of Tobruk, where 14 Hazaran Australian soldiers and 8 000 other Allied troops turned a strategic retreat into the first major defeat of German forces in World War II. How men from the suburbs of Sydney and the farms of New Zealand discovered that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you're not supposed to win. How they proved that Rommel's Afrika Korps wasn't invincible by doing something the German army had never encountered, refusing to surrender when surrender was the logical choice. But this isn't just another tale of military heroics or desert warfare. This is the untold story of how the Anzacs at Tobruk created the first crack in the myth of German invincibility, how they discovered that holding ground could be more strategically valuable than taking it, and how their stubborn refusal to accept defeat changed the entire course of the war in North Africa and beyond. Welcome to the fortress of Tobruk in 1941, where the difference between Allied victory and defeat in the Middle East came down to whether a few thousand soldiers could survive on half rations while fighting off the best army in the world, and where the most important weapon wasn't tanks or artillery, but the kind of bloody-minded determination that refuses to quit even when quitting makes perfect sense. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about the nature of military victory, the power of defensive warfare, and the price of proving that sometimes the best way to win a war is to refuse to lose it. April 10th, 1941. The port of Tobruk, Libya. Lieutenant Colonel John Balfe of the 213th Battalion, Australian Imperial Force, stands on the ancient fortress walls overlooking the Mediterranean, watching the last British ships disappear over the horizon as they evacuate the remnants of the Western Desert Force. Behind him, 22 000 Allied soldiers prepare to defend a position that every military manual says is indefensible. At 35, Balfe is a veteran of the successful campaign against the Italians that captured Tobruk just 3 months earlier. But he understands that defending the port against Rommel's Afrika Korps will be an entirely different proposition than taking it from demoralized Italian forces. Jerry's not going to make the same mistakes the Italians made, Balfe tells his company commanders as they survey the defensive positions around the port. Rommel's got the best equipment, the best training, and 3 months of victories behind him. He's expecting us to fold like everyone else has folded. The German expectation of easy victory at Tobruk reflects the reality of the North African campaign in early 1941. As Rommel's Afrika Korps has reversed 2 years of British gains in just 6 weeks, driving Allied forces back 500 miles and capturing thousands of prisoners. The Germans have every reason to be confident, observes Major James Chen, the intelligence officer for the 9th Australian Division. They've beaten everyone they've faced so far, British, Indian, South African forces. They've got air superiority, better tanks and superior tactics. On paper, we don't have a chance. The strategic situation that faces the Tobruk garrison is indeed desperate, as they find themselves isolated 120 miles behind enemy lines with limited supplies, no air cover and no prospect of relief for months. "We're cut off," explains Major General Leslie Morshead, the Australian commander of the Tobruk garrison, during his first briefing to his officers. "No land route to Egypt, no air support worth mentioning, and supply only by sea at night. We're on our own until the 8th Army can reorganize and counterattack." The isolation of Tobruk creates both strategic vulnerability and tactical opportunity, as the garrison must survive independently while potentially disrupting German operations by threatening their supply lines. "The beauty of our position," Morshead tells his commanders, "is that Jerry can't ignore us. As long as we hold Tobruk, we're a dagger pointed at his back. He has to either capture us or leave a significant force to contain us. Either way, We're tying down troops he needs elsewhere. The strategic value of Tobruk as a threat to German supply lines becomes the foundation for the garrison's defensive strategy, as they understand that their mission is not just to survive, but to force the Germans to divert resources from their main offensive. "We're not just defending a port," explains Lieutenant Colonel Robert Martinez, commander of the 217th Battalion. "We're defending the entire Middle East. If Tobruk falls, Jerry can concentrate his forces for a drive on Cairo and the Suez Canal. If we hold, we keep his forces divided and give the 8th Army time to rebuild." The global implications of the Tobruk siege create enormous pressure on the garrison, as they understand that their success or failure could determine the fate of British interests throughout the Middle East and beyond. "No pressure, lads," Sergeant Danny Washington tells his section as they prepare their defensive positions. "But if we lose this place, Jerry gets the oil fields, the Suez Canal, and probably India as well. Apart from that, it's just another day at the office." The gallows humor that characterizes Australian military culture becomes an important psychological defense mechanism as the soldiers prepare for a siege that could last indefinitely. "The thing about Aussies," observes Captain Michael O'Brien, a British liaison officer attached to the 9th Division, "is that they don't take anything too seriously, including their own deaths. It's either very reassuring or very disturbing, depending on your perspective." The Australian approach to military service, which combines professional competence with irreverent humor and skepticism toward authority, proves well suited to the psychological demands of siege warfare. "We're not impressed by Jerry's reputation," explains Corporal Tommy Kowalski of the 215th Battalion. "He puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like everyone else. The only difference is that his pants are better tailored and he's got better tanks. But tanks don't win battles, soldiers do." The confidence that Australian soldiers maintain despite their disadvantageous situation reflects both their successful experience against Italian forces and their cultural tendency to view military hierarchy and enemy reputation with healthy skepticism. But the most important factor in the garrison's preparation for siege is their understanding of the defensive advantages that Tobruk's position provides, despite its apparent vulnerability. "The Italians built a bloody good fortress here," observes Lieutenant David Park, an engineer officer studying the defensive positions. "Concrete bunkers, anti-tank ditches, interlocking fields of fire. They just didn't have the will to defend it properly. We do." The Italian defensive works around Tobruk represent some of the most sophisticated fortifications in North Africa, designed to protect the port from both land and sea attack, with multiple defensive lines and prepared positions. "The perimeter is about 30 miles long," explains Major Jennifer Walsh, the garrison's chief engineer. 3 defensive lines, each with concrete posts, wire obstacles and anti-tank positions. If we can man them properly and coordinate our defense, we can make Jerry pay a heavy price for every yard. The defensive potential of Tobruk's fortifications becomes apparent as Australian engineers and infantry work to improve and adapt the Italian positions for their own tactical requirements. "We're not just occupying these positions," Walsh tells her engineering teams. "We're making them better. More wire, deeper anti-tank ditches, better camouflage, improved communications. By the time Jerry gets here, this place will be a proper fortress." The engineering work that transforms Tobruk into a modern fortress reflects the Australian Army's emphasis on practical problem-solving and adaptation of existing resources to meet new challenges. "Australians are natural improvisers," observes the British war correspondent, who has been assigned to cover the siege. "Give them some wire, a few shovels, and some explosives, and they'll build you a fortress that would make Vauban proud. They may not follow the textbook, but they get results." The improvisation that characterizes Australian defensive preparations extends beyond engineering to include innovative approaches to supply, communication, and tactical coordination. "We're making this up as we go along," admits Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Martinez, the garrison's supply officer. "There's no manual for defending an isolated port, with limited supplies against the Afrika Korps. We're writing the book as we live it." The absence of doctrine for the tactical situation at Tobruk forces the garrison to develop new approaches to siege warfare that combine traditional defensive principles with innovative adaptations to local conditions. But perhaps the most important preparation for the siege is psychological, as the soldiers must accept that they are committed to a battle with no clear end and no guarantee of survival. "We're not going anywhere," Morshead tells his troops during a formation address. "There's no retreat, no evacuation, no easy way out. We hold this place or we die here." That's not melodrama, that's just the tactical reality. The finality of their commitment to defending Tobruk creates a unique psychological environment that eliminates the option of retreat and focuses the garrison entirely on the mission of holding their positions. "It's actually liberating," explains Sergeant William Thompson of the 223rd Battalion. "When you know you can't run away, you stop thinking about running away and start thinking about how to win. It clarifies the mind wonderfully." The psychological clarity that comes from accepting the impossibility of retreat becomes one of the garrison's most important tactical advantages, as it eliminates the hesitation and second-guessing that can compromise defensive operations. The first German probe of Tobruk's defenses comes on April 11th, just one day after the last British ships leave the harbour, as Rommel's reconnaissance units test the strength and alertness of the garrison. German armoured cars approaching the eastern perimeter reports the observation post overlooking the coastal road. Approximately 6 vehicles, moving slowly, apparently conducting reconnaissance. The German reconnaissance represents the beginning of what will become a 242-day siege, as Rommel attempts to determine whether Tobruk can be taken by assault or will require a formal siege. "Let them have a look," orders Balfe as his men track the German vehicles through their sights, "but make sure they know we're here." A few warning shots to let them know this isn't going to be easy. The measured response to German reconnaissance reflects the garrison's understanding that they must balance the need to demonstrate their strength with the requirement to conserve ammunition for more serious threats. "Single shots aimed fire," calls the section leader as his men engage the German vehicles. "Make them count, but don't waste ammunition. We're going to need every round before this is over." The German armoured cars withdraw after a brief exchange of fire, but their reconnaissance has provided Rommel with his first indication that Tobruk will not fall as easily as other British positions. "The British are still in Tobruk in strength," reports the German reconnaissance commander. "Well-prepared positions, alert defenders, effective fire discipline. This will not be a simple assault." The German assessment of Tobruk's defences marks the beginning of Rommel's realization that capturing the port will require more time and resources than he initially anticipated. "Tobruk is going to be a problem," Rommel tells his staff during their evening briefing. "The British are dug in. They're well supplied by sea, and they're showing no signs of wanting to surrender. We may have to settle in for a proper siege." The prospect of a prolonged siege at Tobruk creates strategic complications for Rommel, as it will tie down forces that he needs for his planned advance on Cairo and the Suez Canal. But for the Australian garrison, the German decision to besiege rather than bypass Tobruk represents the first indication that their strategy of forcing the enemy to commit resources to containing them is working. "Jerry's stuck with us now," observes Morshead with satisfaction. "He can't ignore us, he can't bypass us, and he can't take us easily. We've got him exactly where we want him, committed to a battle he doesn't want to fight." The strategic success of forcing German commitment to the siege validates the garrison's mission and provides psychological encouragement for the long battle ahead. "We may be trapped," and Washington tells his mates, "but so is Jerry. The difference is that we chose to be here, and he didn't choose to be stuck with us. That gives us the advantage." The psychological advantage of fighting a defensive battle on chosen ground becomes one of the garrison's most important assets as they prepare for the long siege ahead. April 30th, 1941. The German assault on Tobruk begins at dawn with a massive artillery barrage that shakes the ancient fortress to its foundations, as Rommel attempts to break the Australian defence with the same combination of firepower and shock tactics that has swept British forces across North Africa. Lieutenant Colonel John Balfe crouches in his command bunker as 88mm shells crash into the defensive positions around him, the concrete walls vibrating with each impact as German artillery systematically targets every known defensive position. "Barrage has been going for 2 hours," reports his communications officer. shouting to be heard over the continuous explosions. Jerry is hitting the eastern sector hardest, probably preparing for his main assault there. The intensity of the German bombardment exceeds anything the Australian garrison has experienced, as Rommel concentrates his artillery to create gaps in the defensive perimeter that his tanks and infantry can exploit. This is different from the Italian attacks, observes Major James Chen as he studies the pattern of German fire. Systematic, coordinated, professional. Jerry knows what he's doing, and he's got the firepower to back it up. The professional competence of German artillery operations demonstrates the qualitative difference between the Afrika Korps and the Italian forces that the Australians defeated earlier, requiring new tactical approaches to defensive warfare. We can't just sit here and take it. Balfe tells his company commanders during a brief lull in the bombardment, "We need to disrupt their fire control, force them to shift targets, make them work for every shot. Passive defense won't work against Jerry." The active defense that Balfe advocates represents an evolution in Australian tactics, as they learn to use their limited resources to maximum effect against a superior enemy. Counter-battery fire on German artillery positions, orders Major Robert Martinez, the garrison's artillery commander. "We may not have as many guns as Jerry, but we can make him think twice about staying in one place too long." The Australian counter-battery fire that follows demonstrates both the skill of their gunners and the effectiveness of well-coordinated defensive operations, as German artillery positions come under accurate fire that forces them to relocate frequently. "Good shooting," calls the forward observer, as Australian shells bracket a German battery position. "Direct hit on the gun line. Jerry's packing up and moving." The success of Australian counter-battery operations validates their aggressive approach to defensive warfare and demonstrates that even outnumbered forces can achieve tactical success through superior skill and coordination. But the real test of Tobruk's defenses comes when German tanks and infantry begin their assault on the eastern perimeter, supported by Stuka dive bombers that attack with the precision and ferocity that has made them the terror of European battlefields. "Stuka's incoming!" shouts the air raid warning as the distinctive whine of diving aircraft fills the air. "Take cover! Take cover!" The Stuka attack that follows represents the first time that Australian forces have faced the full weight of German air-ground coordination, as dive bombers attack specific defensive positions with devastating accuracy. "They're targeting our anti-tank guns," reports Lieutenant David Park as Stuka bombs explode around the gun positions. Jerry knows exactly what he's doing. Neutralize our anti-tank capability, then send in the Panzers. The tactical sophistication of German combined arms operations forces the Australian defenders to adapt their defensive techniques to counter threats they have never faced before. "Disperse the anti-tank guns," orders Balfe. "Don't give Jerry concentrated targets. One gun per position. Maximum camouflage, fire and move. Make him hunt for every gun." The dispersal of anti-tank weapons represents one of many tactical adaptations that the garrison makes in response to German pressure, demonstrating the flexibility and innovation that characterize Australian military culture. German tanks approaching the wire signals the observation post as Mark III and Mark IV Panzers begin their assault on the eastern perimeter, approximately 20 vehicles supported by infantry. The German tank attack that follows tests every aspect of Tobruk's defensive preparations, as Australian anti-tank gunners engage targets that are better armoured and more numerous than anything they have faced before. "Range 800 yards. Target Mark IV Panzer," calls Sergeant Danny Washington as he sights his 2-pounder anti-tank gun. "Steady. Steady. Fire." The anti-tank engagement that follows demonstrates both the courage of Australian gunners and the limitations of their equipment, as 2-pounder guns struggle to penetrate the armour of German tanks at effective ranges. "Hit, but no penetration," reports Washington as his shot strikes the German tank without disabling it. "Jerry's armour is thicker than we thought. We need to get closer or find a better angle." The armour protection of German tanks forces Australian anti-tank crews to develop new tactics that emphasize close-range engagement and precision shooting at vulnerable points. "Aim for the tracks, the vision ports, the gun mantlet," instructs the anti-tank gunnery sergeant. If you can't penetrate the armor, disable the tank. A mobility kill is as good as an armor kill if it stops the attack. The tactical adaptation to German armor superiority reflects the pragmatic approach that characterizes Australian defensive operations, as they focus on achieving mission success rather than textbook solutions. The German assault continues for 6 hours, with tanks and infantry making repeated attempts to break through the eastern perimeter, but Australian defensive fire and the strength of Italian fortifications prevent any significant penetration. "Jerry's pulling back," reports the forward observation post as German forces withdraw to reorganize. Tanks are retreating beyond the wire. Infantry is taking cover in the wadis. Looks like they're done for today. The repulse of the first major German assault validates Tobruk's defensive preparations and demonstrates that the Afrika Korps is not invincible when faced with determined resistance and well-prepared positions. "We've bloodied Jerry's nose," Morshead tells his commanders during the evening briefing. He's learned that Tobruk won't fall to a simple assault. Now he has to decide whether to commit more resources or settle in for a siege. The German decision to continue the siege rather than bypass Tobruk represents a strategic victory for the garrison, as they have successfully forced Rommel to divert resources from his main offensive. Every day Jerry spends trying to take Tobruk is a day he's not advancing on Cairo, observes Major Jennifer Walsh. "We're buying time for the 8th Army to reorganize and counterattack. That's worth more than any tactical victory." The strategic value of the Tobruk siege becomes increasingly apparent as German forces that could be advancing on Egypt are instead committed to containing the Australian garrison. But the successful defense of the first German assault is just the beginning of what will become a 242-day siege, as both sides settle in for a prolonged battle of attrition. "This is going to be a long haul," Balfe tells his men after the German withdrawal. "Jerry's not going away and neither are we. We're going to have to learn to live with each other for a while." The prospect of a prolonged siege creates new challenges for the garrison, as they must maintain their defensive effectiveness while dealing with the psychological and physical stress of continuous combat. "The hardest part isn't the fighting," explains Corporal Tommy Kowalski. "It's the waiting between fights. You're always on edge, always expecting the next attack, never able to relax completely. It wears you down after a while." The psychological stress of siege warfare becomes one of the most serious challenges facing the garrison, as soldiers must maintain alertness and morale despite the constant threat of attack. "We need to keep the men busy," advises the garrison's medical officer. "Idle time breeds worry and depression. Work details, training, improvement of positions, anything to keep their minds occupied and their bodies active." The psychological management of siege conditions becomes as important as tactical preparation, as commanders learn to balance the need for rest with the requirement to maintain combat readiness. The siege continues through May and June, with German attacks becoming more sophisticated and intense as Rommel brings up additional forces and equipment to break the Australian defense. "Jerry's learning our tactics," observes Chen during an intelligence briefing. "He's adapting his approach, using different routes, varying his timing, concentrating his forces at different points. We need to stay ahead of his tactical evolution." The tactical evolution of German assault methods forces the garrison to continuously adapt their defensive techniques, creating a dynamic battle where both sides learn from each engagement. "We're in a tactical arms race, explains Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Martinez. "Jerry tries something new. We develop a counter. He adapts to our counter. We develop a counter to his adaptation. It's like a deadly chess game played with tanks and artillery." The intellectual challenge of siege warfare appeals to the Australian approach to military problems, as they treat each German attack as a puzzle to be solved rather than a crisis to be endured. "The thing about Aussies," observes the British war correspondent, "is that they enjoy a good fight, especially when the odds are against them. They're actually having fun figuring out how to beat Jerry, even though they're outnumbered and outgunned." The competitive spirit that Australian soldiers bring to siege warfare becomes one of their most important psychological advantages, as they view the battle as a contest to be won rather than an ordeal to be survived. By July 1941, the siege has become a strategic stalemate, with German forces unable to capture Tobruk, but unwilling to abandon the attempt. while the Australian garrison continues to tie down resources that Rommel needs for his advance on Egypt. "We've achieved our mission," Morshead tells his officers during a mid-siege assessment. "Jerry's stuck with us, we're disrupting his supply lines, and we're preventing him from concentrating his forces for the drive on Cairo. As long as we hold out, we're winning." The strategic success of the Tobruk siege validates the concept of active defense and demonstrates that holding ground can be more valuable than taking it when the strategic situation requires it. Tobruk has become Jerry's albatross, observes the intelligence analysis from Cairo. He can't capture it, he can't ignore it, and he can't afford to keep throwing resources at it indefinitely. The Australians have created a strategic problem that Rommel can't solve. The transformation of Tobruk from a tactical problem into a strategic dilemma represents one of the most important achievements of the siege, as the garrison's stubborn resistance creates complications that affect German operations throughout North Africa. But for the soldiers holding the perimeter, the most important measure of success is simpler. They're still there, still fighting, and still refusing to surrender despite everything the Afrika Korps can throw at them. "We're the rats of Tobruk," Washington tells a new arrival, using the nickname that German propaganda has given the garrison. "And rats are bloody hard to get rid of once they've found a good hole to hide in." The embrace of the Rats of Tobruk nickname reflects the garrison's pride in their achievement and their determination to continue the fight, regardless of German expectations or propaganda. November 18, 1941. After 242 days of siege, the sound of British artillery from the east signals the beginning of Operation Crusader, the Eighth Army's offensive to relieve Tobruk and drive Rommel's forces back across Libya. Lieutenant Colonel John Balfour stands in his command post, listening to the distant gunfire that means the long isolation is finally coming to an end. Eighth Army's jumped off right on schedule, reports Major James Chen, monitoring radio communications from the advancing British forces. "They're hitting Jerry's positions all along the frontier. This is the big push we've been waiting for." The relief offensive that the garrison has been anticipating for 8 months represents both the culmination of their defensive success and the beginning of a new phase in the North African campaign. "Our job isn't finished yet," Morshead reminds his commanders during the briefing for their part in Operation Crusader. "We're not just going to sit here and wait for relief. We're going to break out and hit Jerry from behind, while the Eighth Army hits him from the front." The breakout operation that Morshead has planned represents a dramatic shift from defensive to offensive operations, as the garrison prepares to leave their fortified positions and attack German forces that have been besieging them for over 8 months. "It's going to feel strange being on the attack again," observes Lieutenant Colonel Robert Martinez as his battalion prepares for the breakout. "We've been thinking defensively for so long that we almost forgot how to advance. But Jerry's about to get a nasty surprise." The psychological transition from siege defense to offensive operations requires the garrison to shift their mindset from survival to victory, drawing on reserves of aggression that have been suppressed during months of defensive fighting. "We know Jerry's positions better than he knows them himself," explains Sergeant Danny Washington during his section's briefing. "We've been watching him for 8 months, studying his routines, learning his weaknesses. Now we're going to use that knowledge against him." The intelligence advantage that the garrison has gained through months of observation becomes a crucial factor in planning their breakout, as they understand German defensive positions and tactics better than any attacking force could. "The plan is simple," Balfour tells his company commanders. "We break out at dawn, hit Jerry's siege lines from behind and link up with the Eighth Army advancing from the east. We've got surprise, we know the ground, and we've got 8 months of frustration to work off." The breakout plan that the garrison executes represents the culmination of their siege experience, as they use their intimate knowledge of the local terrain and German positions to achieve tactical surprise. "Jerry's not expecting us to come out fighting," observes Corporal Tommy Kowalski as he checks his equipment for the attack. "He thinks we're beaten down, demoralized, just hanging on until relief arrives. He's about to learn that rats can bite as well as hide." The element of surprise that the garrison achieves reflects both German assumptions about the effects of prolonged siege and the psychological resilience that Australian forces have maintained despite months of isolation and combat. The breakout begins at 05:30 hours with a coordinated artillery barrage that targets German positions that have been under observation for months, achieving devastating accuracy against enemies who thought they were safely out of range. Fire mission: target German command post, grid reference 314567, calls the forward observer as Australian artillery opens fire on positions that have been carefully plotted during the siege. Direct hit, secondary explosions, target destroyed. The precision of Australian artillery fire during the breakout demonstrates the advantage of fighting from prepared positions with pre-registered targets, as gunners engage German positions with accuracy that would be impossible for advancing forces. "Jerry's caught completely off guard," reports the reconnaissance patrol that has penetrated German lines. "His positions are oriented to defend against attack from the east, not from Tobruk. We're hitting him where he's weakest." The tactical surprise that the breakout achieves validates the garrison's strategy of maintaining offensive capability while conducting defensive operations, as they retain the ability to attack when the strategic situation permits. "Advance by bounds, maintain contact, exploit success," orders Martinez as his battalion moves through German positions that are collapsing under the unexpected assault. "Jerry's running, and we're going to keep him running." The aggressive pursuit that Australian forces conduct during the breakout reflects their transformation from besieged defenders to confident attackers, as months of successful defense have given them the psychological advantage over their former besiegers. "Contact with 8th Army," comes the radio call that signals the end of Tobruk's isolation. "Link up achieved at grid reference 298543. The siege is broken." The relief of Tobruk after 242 days represents one of the most significant Allied victories of 1941, as the garrison's stubborn defense has contributed to the first major defeat of German forces in World War II. "We've done it," Morshead tells his exhausted but victorious troops. 242 days of siege, and we're still here. Jerry tried everything he had, and it wasn't enough. We've proven that the Afrika Korps isn't invincible." The psychological impact of Tobruk's successful defense extends far beyond the immediate tactical situation, as it demonstrates that German forces can be defeated by determined resistance and superior defensive tactics. "The myth of German invincibility is broken," observes the war correspondent who has covered the entire siege. "If a few thousand Australians can hold off Rommel's best troops for 8 months, then the Germans can be beaten anywhere." Tobruk has changed the psychology of this war. The strategic implications of the Tobruk siege extend throughout the Allied war effort, as the successful defense provides proof that German forces can be defeated and that Allied resistance can succeed against seemingly impossible odds. "Tobruk saved the Middle East," concludes the post-battle analysis from London. By tying down German forces and preventing Rommel from concentrating for his advance on Cairo, the garrison bought time for Allied forces to reorganize and counterattack. Without Tobruk, we might have lost Egypt, the Suez Canal, and the oil fields. The global strategic impact of the siege validates the garrison's sacrifice and demonstrates the importance of tactical success in achieving strategic objectives. But perhaps the most important achievement of the Tobruk siege is its demonstration that defensive warfare can be as decisive as offensive operations when conducted with skill, determination, and strategic understanding. "We didn't just survive the siege," reflects Balfe during the post-battle assessment. "We won it. We forced Jerry to fight the battle we wanted to fight, on ground we chose, under conditions that favored us. That's not just good defense, that's good generalship." The tactical lessons of Tobruk influence Allied defensive doctrine throughout the remainder of the war, as military planners recognize the value of well-prepared defensive positions defended by determined troops. The Australians at Tobruk wrote the book on modern siege warfare, observes the British Army's Tactical Development Centre. Active defence, aggressive patrolling, continuous improvement of positions, maintenance of offensive capability. These principles are now standard doctrine for defensive operations. The doctrinal impact of Tobruk extends beyond the immediate tactical lessons to influence Allied understanding of the relationship between defensive and offensive operations in modern warfare. The human cost of the siege, 832 Australian casualties out of 14 Eurozone troops, represents a remarkably low rate for such an extended and intense battle, validating the effectiveness of well-prepared defensive positions and skilled tactical leadership. "We lost good men," Washington reflects during a memorial service for the fallen, "but we saved a lot more by fighting smart instead of just fighting hard. Every man who came home from Tobruk owes his life to the blokes who planned this defense properly." The casualty rates at Tobruk demonstrate that defensive warfare, when properly conducted, can achieve strategic objectives while minimizing human losses, providing a model for future operations. When the siege officially ends on December 7, 1941, the garrison has achieved something unprecedented in World War II. The first major defeat of German forces by Allied troops, accomplished through defensive rather than offensive operations. "The rats of Tobruk have shown the world that Germans can be beaten," declares Prime Minister John Curtin in his address to the Australian Parliament. "They've proven that Australian soldiers are second to none, and they've saved the Middle East through their courage and determination." The political recognition of the garrison's achievement reflects its strategic importance and its impact on Allied morale throughout the war. Tobruk was the turning point, concludes General Claude Auchinleck, commander of British forces in the Middle East. Not just in North Africa, but in the entire war. It was the first time German forces had been decisively defeated, and it proved that they could be beaten by troops who were properly led and properly motivated. The strategic assessment of Tobruk's importance validates the garrison's sacrifice and establishes their defense as one of the decisive battles of World War II. The veterans of Tobruk carry their experience forward to other battles throughout the war, applying the lessons they learned during the siege to operations in New Guinea, Italy, and the Pacific, where their understanding of defensive warfare proves invaluable. "Once you've held Tobruk for 8 months, observes one veteran, every other battle seems manageable. We learned that you can beat anyone if you're willing to dig in, fight smart, and never give up. That's a lesson that serves you well anywhere." The lesson of the Anzacs at Tobruk isn't just about the effectiveness of defensive warfare or the importance of determination in military operations. It's about the power of refusing to accept defeat when defeat seems inevitable. The understanding that sometimes the most important victories are achieved by not losing rather than by winning, and the recognition that strategic success can come from tactical patience and professional competence rather than dramatic gestures. The garrison at Tobruk succeeded because they understood that their mission was not to destroy the enemy, but to prevent the enemy from achieving his objectives. They proved that defensive warfare could be as decisive as offensive operations when conducted with skill and determination. Their story also demonstrates the importance of morale and unit cohesion in sustaining military effectiveness under extreme conditions, showing how shared hardship and mutual dependence can create fighting units that exceed the sum of their individual capabilities. Stories like this remind us that the most important military victories are often the ones that prevent disasters rather than create triumphs, that the willingness to endure hardship for strategic purposes can be more valuable than the ability to inflict damage on enemies, and that sometimes the greatest courage is shown not in attacking, but in refusing to retreat. That's what we explore here. The moments when defensive determination becomes offensive capability, when tactical patience creates strategic opportunity, when the refusal to surrender becomes the foundation for ultimate victory. If you believe these stories matter, if you want to understand the power of defensive warfare and strategic patience, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because there are so many more stories like this one waiting to be told with the depth and recognition they deserve. You won't want to miss what we discover next.